Welcome to Comment with me, George Galloway, here on Press TV. Still, as always, the voice of the voiceless. Comment is the big conversation. It's the great debate, but it can only be a debate if you join in. That's why, above all, I need your telephone calls. You call us, we'll call you back. Establish a clear line, and remember, if you get on the TV with me, the volume on your TV has to be down at 0, or I'll have to move swiftly on because no one will understand either of us. Because of the 3-second time delay, you'll be hearing me 3 seconds late. 44208-601-4555. That is the number to call. That's 44208-601-4555. Call us and we'll call you back. You can also SMS the show on 447800008066. And you can email me at comment@presstv.co.uk. And this being the 21st century, you can even tweet me at comment_presstv. Tonight, of course, we're discussing Iraq. Though Iraq in the round, not just the events of the last few days, but the events that have unrolled over many years, maybe decades in Iraq. We're asking who caused the mess in Iraq. The proximate cause, or the proximate backdrop to this, is the parliamentary move that I initiated just in the last few days, last Tuesday to be precise, to begin the impeachment of Tony Blair, which effectively means Parliament putting him on trial. It requires Parliament to decide by a simple majority of those voting, as long as the House is quorate, 100 members must participate. But if I win 51-49, even if the others are too afraid to turn up, then Mr. Blair's case, the impeachment process, goes to a specially created select committee of the House of Commons, which works on the articles of impeachment. Then Tony Blair comes to the bar of the House. I don't mean by that one of the 19 drinking bars that the taxpayer subsidizes in the British Parliament. I mean the long brass bar at which he would have to stand and face his accusers, one of whom would be me. He could defend himself, of course. He could bring representation to defend himself. But in the end, if Parliament found him guilty, they have the power to imprison him. I've started this because I don't expect anytime soon the Chilcot inquiry to do the job we paid them many tens of millions of pounds to do. Neither do I expect the International Criminal Court at The Hague to put him on trial, because you have to be a black African to be tried at the International Criminal Court. So that's my proximate relationship to this. And of course, tomorrow in central London, Press TV will be covering this exclusively for television. An open-top London bus will be touring the scene of many crimes, demanding that people support the cause of sacking Tony Blair from his position as so-called peace envoy in the Middle East. Press TV will be on board that bus with many celebrities, and that bus will be carrying the hopes of at least the tens of thousands who have signed the petition so far. You don't have to be a rebel to sign this petition. It's been signed by some of the most conservative establishment figures in the country. Former British ambassadors, several of them in fact, they're coming in thick and fast. Conservative politicians, Liberal Democrats, Labour politicians, as well, of course, as people like me, and former London Mayor Ken Livingstone, who sometimes stands in this very spot. Professor Noam Chomsky, the great left-wing intellectual from MIT in the United States. Many, many people. Russell Brand, the English comedian, now a Hollywood transatlantic star, signed it this very day. I saw him do so and hold up the hashtag #SackBlair. SackBlair.org is where to go if you want to sign that. Now, Iraq is not the only issue, of course, in this process of having Blair sacked. and impeach. But you cannot discuss who caused the mess in Iraq without talking about Tony Blair and George W. Bush. They were, of course, the major contributors to a war, invasion, and occupation which killed 1 million Iraqis and which scattered 3 million more across the borders of Iraq as exiles, as refugees, many of them in very parlous conditions even now, more than a decade after the invasion. They atomized Iraq. They sectarianized Iraq. They took every pre-existing sectarian division and magnified it and institutionalized it in order to divide the Iraqi people, the better to rule them and the better to steal their wealth. So Bush and Blair must take the major responsibility for the mess in Iraq. But there are other culprits too. Saudi Arabia was accused this week by Prime Minister al-Maliki in Baghdad of playing a major role in the funding and the arming of what is sometimes called ISIL, sometimes called ISIS. I prefer to call them al-Qaeda, even though al-Qaeda expelled them because they were, and I quote, too extreme, too sectarian. So the gang that was too extreme for al-Qaeda, that was too sectarian for al-Qaeda, are now ruling significant chunks of Iraq. And they have done so with somebody's money, with somebody's weapons, with somebody's transport, with somebody's communications equipment, using somebody's night sights on their weapons, and so on. And that somebody is one or other of the Persian Gulf satrapies who usually do the bidding of the United States and Britain and other imperialist countries. And there is no doubt that the chaos, carnage, havoc in Syria was funded through those Persian Gulf satrapies. There's no doubt that at least one of those satrapies is a major funder and armor of what's going on in Iraq. I'm not so sure that the Saudi state is actually supporting ISIL, though individuals within Saudi Arabia certainly are, and the state, if it wanted to, could put a stop to that. But I think that the Saudi state is supporting other fanatic, extremist, takfiri groups rather than ISIL. But there is at least one of these satrapies that is responsible for all the material that ISIL have been using. And of course, we know where it ends. It ends with people having their throats cut, their heads chopped off, their hearts cut out and eaten, and the videotaping of all of it to go out on the internet because they imagine it's some kind of attractive look. It ends, as always, in the destruction of shrines, destruction of graves, even of prophets. The prophet Yunus, known in English as Jonah, had his grave desecrated, destroyed with electric drills and digging equipment just this very week in Iraq. And I just wonder what kind of mentality has captured the minds of those who do this kind of thing. Who imagines that God could approve of the prophets' graves being dug up and desecrated? Who imagines that? What kind of Muslim imagines that the Almighty will smile on prophets, peace be upon them, having their graves destroyed and desecrated? It genuinely baffles me. If anyone out there knows the answer to that, I'd really like to hear it. There will be many other candidates for blame in this discussion we're going to have tonight who caused the mess in Iraq. First up is Sikandar in Pakistan. Sikandar, welcome to the show. Go ahead.
Yes, hi, George. How are you? This is Sikandar here. I'm calling from Pakistan.
Very nice to hear from you, brother. Thank you.
Yes, how are you, George?
By the grace of God,
I'm a great fan of yours.
I'm good.
And sorry?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I know you're an advocate of, in Pakistan, especially the Karachi issue, but that's a different thing. You know, Mr. Altaf Hussain, and I admire you for that, for standing up for that criminal who's a British citizen. But apart from that, I would like to add is that, yes, the Iraq thing is created by the British and the Americans because they themselves created these monsters, like Saddam Hussein was their creation. They unleashed these dictators on our countries like they did with Pakistan. General Zia, they supported him in the 1980s. Hello?
Yes. General Zia, General Musharraf, eventually they get to call themselves presidents.
The mess which Pakistan is in today because of the American support, Ronald Reagan's support for General Zia in the 80s, supported the so-called jihad war, which they created all the Frankenstein monsters for us,
Indeed.
And
Indeed.
today, which both the countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan, are suffering. And it was, and yes, a very drunken, immoral, corrupt congressman from Texas, Charlie Wilson, who had no idea about this part of the world and used a fake ideology and imposed it on our part of the world. And General Zia and his cronies, they ruined this country, supported by the Americans. And the funny part is, the very people were sitting, if you remember that video, sitting with Ronald Reagan in the video, which Ronald Reagan equated them to the founders of America,
Yes,
and it was so funny. People were wondering who's Benjamin Franklin and who's Abraham Lincoln.
The only thing they had in common, Sikandar, was that they had beards. But Reagan and Thatcher definitely both showcased the so-called freedom fighters in Afghanistan in the 1980s, who are the fathers of all of this. And that war, Charlie Wilson's war, as the movie had it, and Rambo and all the rest, these were all parts of a process of glorifying this kind of extremism. They built, as I often say, a Frankenstein monster. They thought that they could control it. But of course, the point about a monster is that nobody can control it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a monster. Sikandar, thanks for getting us off to a great start. Let's talk to Tahir in Manchester. Always worth hearing about. Tahir, who do you think caused the mess in Iraq? Tahir, are you there? Go ahead. Unfortunately, Tahir isn't there. We're talking about Iraq, which, of course, every day brings more catastrophic news. Even in the Kirkuk city center yesterday, a city supposedly taken into safe custody, if you believe that, you'll believe anything, by the Kurdish Peshmerga. They took control of Kirkuk, and they may not be very keen to relinquish control, but we were told that Kirkuk was a safe city until last night, when dozens of people were eviscerated in a suicide bombing. Tahir in Manchester is back on the line. Let's hear what he has to say. Tahir, welcome.
Yeah, hi, George.
Hi there.
Welcome.
Go ahead.
Yeah, George, just a very quick point. From last week, I was on the call, and I mentioned the thing about the passports.
Yes, good. It was a very good point. Yes, I remember it.
Yes. So just to very quickly, before I come on to today's point, what I wanted to say about that was that my main concern with that was ISIL possibly using those, as we saw when the passport was found after the 9/11 attacks.
Yes, miraculously.
Miraculously, exactly. My main concern with that point was making that point that I think passports, I don't think we should be surprised if we see attacks on other foreign countries pointing a finger to a country that has absolutely nothing to do with those attacks. And
Well, that has happened already, Tahir. I mean, in the last few years, how many incidents have occurred in different parts of the world, in India, in Thailand, and various other places, that were immediately, promptly blamed on Iran, when Iran could not conceivably, even if it were venal enough, could not possibly objectively have had any interest in so doing. These killings were taking place in countries that Iran had good relations with. It's simply madness to imagine that Iran was behind those crimes. So these kind of false flags definitely can be expected, Tahir.
I believe so. But in terms of today's topic, George, in terms of who's to blame for all the mess, at the moment, I think a major blame really goes towards the media, because I think we're actually, I mean, I could almost hand on heart guarantee you what the outcome is going to be of Iraq. I think I already know it, because I think we're being set up for it through the media. And, the media's setting out the stall. It's managing expectations of the general public and of the parties involved in the Iraq crisis by planting the seed of a tripartite Iraq, almost as if it's a foregone conclusion. Yeah. And as the old saying goes, why bark when you've got dogs to bark for you? One media outlet puts it out and then others pick up on it. So by the time that it's suggested to the parties involved by John Kerry, William Hague, or whomever, it no longer seems like it's, so much of a ludicrous idea. I believe it is. And by that time, we've all bought into it, and we mentally feel like we've come to that conclusion ourselves of it being the inevitable result, having read it 1,000 times already. Yeah. And, I think instead of, because, I mean, if you look at the way, Maliki was initially, it was, all Maliki's government is, they're the victims. It's kind of shifting almost as if, he is actually the terrorist, and, the Kurds and the Sunnis are being, effectively targeted by him.
Well, what we have is countries and media that hailed as the great achievement of the overthrow of the dictatorship in Iraq, that we now had democratic elections in Iraq. But the man who won by far the largest number of seats, he was 2/3 better off in seats than the second man, and he's being told that he must go. He's being told that he must choose this, that, or the other government. He's being told by foreign countries what he should do. Now, don't get me wrong, Tahir, and this is my own view, only mine, not Press TV's. I think that Maliki has been a very poor Prime Minister. I think he's made very many mistakes, as did other Prime Ministers before him. The occupation made it very easy to make those mistakes. And of course, they themselves, when they were running Iraq, made catastrophic errors. The dismissal of the Iraqi army, the dismissal of the Iraqi police force, the sending home without pay of all the Iraqi military officers was an accident waiting to happen. What do you think all those soldiers, all those officers are going to do once you've dismissed them, demolished them, abolished them, and sent them home? So there have been many, many mistakes in this picture, and I don't think that Maliki has done nearly well enough in making a government in Baghdad that was securely rooted in different parts of the community. But the one group of people who have no right to interfere in who is to be the Prime Minister of Iraq are the people who first destroyed Iraq and then set up, created the very sectarian political structures that made someone like Maliki rise to the top. But on your substantive point, you couldn't be more right. They are intending to divide Iraq into three parts. The Kurdish part has effectively already gone. All we're arguing about are its borders, although those borders are very, very important. They're important for Iran, they're important for Turkey, and they're important for Iraq. Because if the Kurds seize and hold Kirkuk, then Iraq has lost at least 40% of its oil riches. Iraq can never agree to that, and I don't think that Turkey would fancy it either. So the border between the Kurdish entity and the Arab entity would be very fraught indeed. But the key point is, you cannot divide Iraq into Sunni and Shia. First of all, most of the Kurdish are Sunni, but many of them are Shia. And in the Arab parts of the country, which is most of it, every single family is intermarried. Every tribe is intermingled. There are Sunnis and Shia in every tribe, in every street, in every town, in every city, and practically in every village. So how are you going to divide it? Like the Indian subcontinent was divided, where millions were killed, and the seeds of war after war after war were sown by the way that that partition was carried out. That would be an even bigger disaster than the one we've got now. Tahar, over to you.
Well, I agree with you absolutely, George, and I think that if they were to divide it, it still does not solve the problem of ISIL. If it was, if magically somehow they divided it tomorrow and everybody came to that agreement and everybody came to that conclusion and said, yeah, okay, let's divide it into these three separate areas, which, as you said, I think it's impossible because, quite rightly, as you've mentioned, I think the Shia and Sunni, all throughout Iraq, you can't divide it. They are intermingled in the tribes through marriage, through other relationships, and I think if we were to wave a magic wand today, and suddenly tomorrow Iraq was split into a Kurdish area, the south being a Shiite area, and a Sunni area in the north, that would not stop ISIL and their objectives.
No, exactly.
What they want to do.
They would have a state to operate from. Not Syria, but the statelet that had been created in the west and part of the north of Iraq.
Exactly my point. And that's the thing that scares me more than anything else about why this view is being so heavily pushed in the media outlets. And I did a search today on Google, George, and the amount of media outlets that are now all singing the same tune about, the almost inevitability of a tripartite Iraq is scary, and that's what leads me to believe that is
the plan. That was Joe Biden's plan before the invasion and occupation of Iraq, Tahar. I don't know if you know that. If you go back to Joe Biden's approach to the run-up to the war, he was arguing that Iraq should be broken into three parts and that should be the outcome of the war. Joe Biden is now the Vice President of the United States. He might think that he's going to get his way, but I don't believe so, Tahar. First of all, I believe the Iraqi people themselves will resist it. Secondly, the neighbors must know that it is a recipe for more, not less, chaos, interference. It would have to bring other powers, other neighbors in to defend their own interests. And before we know it, we'd have a general regional war raging in the area. Tahar in Manchester, as always, a pleasure to hear from you and to talk to you. We're talking about Iraq, about who is responsible for the mess, from Sykes and Picot with the borders that they drew, right up to the antics of unelected dictatorial kings and princes and emirs in the region today. I'll be back, God willing, in just 3 minutes with the second half of Comment. Don't go away. Welcome back to Comment with me, George Galloway, here on Press TV, still the voice of the voiceless. We're discussing the catastrophe in Iraq and trying to attribute responsibility and blame for it. It's quite a charge sheet, stretching as it does from Sykes-Picot, almost 100 years to go, right up to the present day. Indeed, the present hour. I've just learned that more than 40 people were slaughtered, mainly Shiite people, in a mainly Shiite area in the north of Baghdad. 40 people eviscerated like that this hour, and just breaking news. Sometimes you wonder, how can there be anybody left in Iraq? I mean, tens of thousands every year. In 2007, I think, 27,000 people were killed in this kind of sectarian madness. And of course, ISIL are feeding on pre-existing, no doubt, and in part genuine grievances in the west and in the north of Iraq. But their purpose is to murder anybody with whom they disagree on politics or religion, on the length of your beard, the length of your trousers, the shape of your hijab, and the way that you pray. They are already desecrating other people's holy places, even destroying tombs of the prophets themselves. This very week, destroying the tomb of the prophet Yunus, or Jonah, as he is known in Ireland and elsewhere, where my next caller is patiently waiting on the line. Niall in Ireland, as always, a pleasure to hear from you. Go ahead, sir.
Pleasure to be on the show, comrade.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Just looking, George, at Iraq, you know, it's who to blame, you know, in all of this, the mess that has happened. Well, you know, where do you want to start? Do you want to go back to 1917, 1918 Sykes-Picot Agreement, when the British and the French imperialists took the remnants of the Ottoman Turkish Empire and just drew lines in the map and said this country will be called Jordan, this will be Iraq, or this will be Palestine, soon to be Israel? You know, do you fast forward then, George, on to 1979, when the CIA installed Saddam Hussein, of which, when he was installed, the CIA then promptly handed over all the names of the members of the Communist Party of Iraq, and then Saddam Hussein had them liquidated. Of course, the United States gave Saddam Hussein the gas in which he used against the Kurds. And of course, you know, not to mention the United States in the invasion of the war in 1991. Then we had the invasion of Iraq back in 2003, and the use of the US and the Britain's various satrapies in fueling and arming these various groups. And as I said, George, you know, it's like pouring gasoline onto the fires of sectarianism. Now, George, you know, looking at ISIS, you know, it's no accident as to their meteoric rise. Now, I'm looking at an article in the International Business Times. It was written last week, and it said, it was reported back in 2012 that the United States and Saudi Arabia were training and arming and funding the ISIS terrorists in camps in Jordan, and now they want to bomb them.
Yeah, you really couldn't make it up, Niall. As always, a masterful run at the big issues there. In fact, the overthrow of President Qasem in Iraq in 1963 and his subsequent murder took place almost exactly at the time of the overthrow of the great Sukarno in Indonesia. And the US role was exactly the same. The US embassy was involved in the Ba'athist overthrow of Qasem. The US embassy gave, as you said, the names and addresses and all the details of all the so-called communists and Nasserists, for that matter, active in support of Qasem's government and the Baathists promptly murdered them one by one. And the United States did support the war that Iraq waged against Iran, did, as did Britain, arm the Iraqi regime and give them the maps, the better to target the arms on. And they did encourage the Iraqi regime to invade Kuwait, only to lure the Iraqis into a big trap. And the rest is history. The Iraqi people have paid many times for Western policy towards their country. They paid when Qasem was brutally overthrown. They paid again when the allies of the Saddam regime became the enemies of the Saddam regime. And hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of Iraqi women and children have perished over this period at the hands of Western policymakers. Now, brilliant. Let's go to California. Who wouldn't? And talk to Kafan. Go ahead, sir.
Yes?
Yes, you have to turn your TV down.
Okay. Yeah, how you doing, George?
Yes, by the grace of God, I'm good. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. You see what happened? I'm talking about the Iraqis and the problem over there. This is something we know, and it doesn't need really in a PhD to know that. This is a plan that has been done long times ago by the Western world. This is a war against Islam, and especially against Iran, you know. They want to destroy and they want to weaken Iran. And this is the best way, in able to weaken Iran, they want to weaken the Iraqi country, you know, and the Iraqi government. And the other hand is also, it's going to make, they are trying to create a big international war between the Sunni and the Shia. So the Sunni and the Shia, they will kill each other, and the Muslim will kill each other in every part of this world. God forbid, you know. And so they can get rid of everybody, and they can make the Muslim countries or the Muslim people in the world all the way down to the ground. And then after that, they just only need a leash to put around their neck and start pushing them. I'm just trying to say, where is the Muslim scholar? Where is the Muslim scholar in the world where they can stand up right now and they say this is not a Sunni Shia war. This is the war of the West. It's a crusader war against the Islam and against the Arab all over the world. Every single place in the Islamic world, there is a war. It has been created by the West and by NATO's. And this is really a war against Islam. You don't need a PhD to know that. You know what I mean? Now we're talking about those murderers who are trying to kill and kill and kill. I mean, those people, they are the biggest enemy of Islam. When you put 1,700 people and executing those people, here I am, and I want to show this to my children. This is the Islam. This is the head of the Islam. This is Mujahideen. If the picture of the Mujahideen like that, what about the murderer? What about Al Capone? You know what I mean? They are the same. They are all killer. How can anybody stand with those people who kill and murder human beings in the name of Islam? I think Islam is all the way away from those people. I think these people, every single Muslim person, if he's Sunni or Shia, he should fight. And he should fight against these people, you know, who really, they are murderers. They are really murderers. And I just want to blame all the way to the Muslim scholar in the world, which especially the Sunnis, and I'm Sunni too, why they are not standing up, why they are not saying we are all Muslim world. And what the Prophet Muhammad say? He say we have to be all together. How come they are quiet? How come they let the killing going? How come they try to picture the other Muslim, which is Shia, not Shia? They create them like they are enemy of Islam. And they're trying to take the real enemy of Islam is not the Shia, it's not the Islam themselves, it's the West, it's the United States, in the West, in the European country. They are the people who try to destroy those people. They want to bring them back. They want to bring them back to the camel and the cow. And they want to bring them to be slaves so they can put the leash around their neck. And this is my opinion.
Well, it's the most powerful opinion of tonight and many a night. And I hope it goes far and wide to the audience this evening and on YouTube, where it's definitely destined. A wonderful call from Kafan in California. And I'm very grateful that you made that call. I think this is the first time for Kafan to be on the show. I hope it's not the last. Now, we're talking about the chaos, the havoc, the carnage, the mass murder, mutilation. I mean, Kafan made the point that they boasted, they told us that they murdered in cold blood 1,700 unarmed captives with their hands tied behind their backs. And he said that he might show his children this, but I'm sure that he won't, and I'm sure that he shouldn't. Because not only did they murder this 1,700 people that they held captive after a fight, after engaging in war against them, in absolute contradiction and defiance of every Islamic tenet for the treatment of prisoners. They murdered them and mutilated them in the most grotesque way. In fact, I can't bring myself even to tell you exactly what they did to those prisoners. Suffice to say that no beast in the jungle, no beast in the jungle would willfully, more wickedly, more grotesquely mutilate before killing their victim. It's really beyond words. It is beyond description. Let's talk to Ariane, my old adversary in New York. Go ahead, Ariane.
Hey, Mr. George, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Go ahead.
God bless you, man. I wish there were more people like you in the world.
Thank you, brother.
I believe, George, Iraq carnage is a direct result of U.S. invasion in Iraq. There was absolutely no reason for U.S. Army to go there and interfere. Iraq didn't have any weapons of mass destruction. Iraq wasn't a threat to the United States for the moment, so the invasion of Iraq was absolutely the result of what's going on today. I would say another thing. United States government, George, it's totally failed its foreign policy lately. They care more about 2-3 Syrian warplanes bombing the ISIL terrorists, people who actually has been spreading terrorism throughout the world, in Russia, in the United States. We had recently the Boston bombings, but the Americans, they forget very soon. These are the very same people. But they are very fast to condemn the Syrian warplanes bombing these rats, but they failed to condemn the Israeli bombings in Syria, killing tens of soldiers, apparently for no good reason. And what a coincidence that the person who died, he was an Arab actually living in Israel. He wasn't he was an Israeli citizen, but he was an Arab. And with many false flags that we have seen, I wouldn't be so surprised if I found out that some Israeli gangs killed the poor boy and then blame it in the Syrian military, so they can bomb them, and they can give the rebels and the ISIL, Nusra Front, the upper hand. This is what Israel has been doing since the turmoil started in Syria, and they're gonna keep doing. They're not gonna give up because they know very well that dealing with Hezbollah and dealing with Assad and dealing with Iran is gonna be extremely hard for them for days to come, because it's going to take maybe a long time, but the Israeli government and the United States government, they ultimately will have to pay the price and answer to the world why they value more the cheap oil that they get from Saudi Arabia instead of the human blood. That's all.
Well, it's a very powerful call, Ariane, and I thank you for it. The cheap oil that they get from Saudi Arabia, of course, will not be necessary forever. New ways of developing different forms of energy, many of those being renewable, and therefore removing the monopoly power, because Saudi Arabia currently has the monopoly power in the sense that it can increase its production of oil phenomenally and very, very quickly. It has, because of the riches that it has developed over decades, more than half a century, nearly a century, it has built up fantastic capacity to be a swing producer. It can bring the price of oil down to rock bottom, or it can shoot it up to the top of the tree. If there's a country like Venezuela, which is falling out with its major customer, the United States, Saudi Arabia can immediately volunteer to step into the brink. But this will not last forever, indeed will not last for long. My prediction is that by the halfway point of this century, we'll be exceedingly lucky still to be here, but God willing, all of our children will still be here, and definitely, God willing, all of their children will still be here, and Saudi Arabia will be nothing, nothing, nothing. And it will have wasted trillions upon trillions of dollars of wealth with which it could have built a good life for the people, the good, God-fearing people of Arabia. And I mean Arabia more generally. They could have had people in other parts of Arabia clamoring to join them, clamoring for federation with them. Instead, they have made themselves the most hated regime on the earth, and that's saying something. Herbach is in Lebanon, where a very strange event occurred yesterday in a Beirut hotel room. Maybe you'll tell us about it. Herbach, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. George.
Good evening, sir. Go ahead.
I'm going to say that the one that making money in the oil and weapon business, they are all responsible. The one people, imagine, in Libya, 6 million people, they have 16 million pieces of weapon.
Yeah.
Saudi is making now, every hour, $3 million more when the Iraqis, right? I'm reading and following everything. I'm not going to blame Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia can do anything an inch forward without United States. So the problem is with United States.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that. The idea that Saudi Arabia has any kind of independent policy towards Iraq or towards Syria is preposterous.
Yes. Imagine now, United States is going to do some sanctions against Boko Haram. What a ridiculous. What they were doing all these years. They are watching, butchering people, kidnapping girls and everything. What a double standard.
Whatever happened to those girls? Those girls, the hashtag, those girls that were top of the news. We couldn't move without seeing the plight of these poor girls. Whatever happened to them? I haven't seen it on the news for weeks.
And imagine the airplane. And the airplane also. What happened to that airplane, Malaysian airplane?
That's a good point.
Talking about it.
That's a very good point. I'd forgotten about that airplane. Completely forgot what happened to the Malaysian airliner. My goodness. Herbach, you've certainly thrown a couple of what we call in cricket, a couple of googlies, curveballs. We don't quite know how to handle them. It's a great call. Thanks. Let's talk to Awudu in Cameroon. Go ahead, sir. Hello, Cameroon. Oh, what a pity. I really wanted to speak to someone from Cameroon, but that call appears to have been dropped. We're talking about Iraq. Who is responsible for the mess that Iraq is in? What's it all about? Where is it leading? Who's behind it? Who's funding it? Who's arming it? Whose propaganda machine is softening us up for what might be an attempt to formally partition the country, and Iraq would then be literally no more. It would be broken into three. You see, my point is this. I have fought all of my life against Sykes-Picot, the division of the Arabs into 23 artificial states. But the one thing worse than Sykes-Picot would be a Sykes-Picot 2, where instead of 23 Arab countries, we had 233 or 2,333 emirates, all based on sectarianism, all quarreling and arguing and regularly fighting each other. But what a dream that would be for the imperialists. The Arabs would be weak and divided, the better for the West to go on stealing their things. The Arabs would be quarreling with each other, fearful of each other, one emirate fearing the incursion of another. So we'll sell them weapons. In fact, we'll sell them all weapons so they can point those weapons at each other. And with a bit of luck, every so often, they will erupt into warfare, use the weapons, and have to buy new ones. Can't you see, you Arabs? Can't you see what they're doing? Honestly, I don't know what to say. Shoaib is in the United Kingdom. Go ahead.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead quickly.
Good evening to you, George. I was just going to say to you, my friend, the ongoings in Iraq at the moment, I think they've been caused by the people that have gone into Iraq, invaded the place and left the Muslims to fight amongst themselves. Do you agree with that, my friend?
I do.
I think it's the same case with Syria, where the Sunnis and Shias fighting. This wasn't the case before. And since America and Britain have been into Iraq, for example, as soon as they've gone out, look what they've caused. Now they're going to sit back and watch and then take over.
Well, it's a very powerful call. Unfortunately, it's come late in the show, and I've only 30 seconds left to say that I agree with you, but that what's necessary in Iraq is to divide the Sunni mass from the ISIL Al-Qaeda fanatics. We have to win that Sunni mass to our side as a national Iraq, truly national. And if we can do that, we can isolate these terrorists. If we do not do that, these terrorists will continue to flourish and prosper. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you.
Hello, just comment the name and the country with that number. And just make sure your television volume's set to 0. So, 0. Can you spell your name for me? Yeah, I know. You redirect